Hello, and welcome to Pique My Interest, a podcast dedicated to creativity. My name is Scoob Decker, and I am an artist, and your host. Pique My Interest is an exploration in meeting some incredible artists, learning about their craft, and exploring what makes them create. With a background in pharmacy, Stephanie Ma has always had that creative itch. When moving from Canada to the US, she was unable to continue her pharmacy practice and was forced to find another life path. And because of this, thankfully for the art world, she was able to scratch that crafting itch. Enter wreaths. Stephanie is very early in her exploration of yarn, watercolors, and moss sculptures, but her work with the holiday staple decoration shines bright. In this episode, Stephanie dives into her creativity and the endless possibilities of wreaths, and wants people to know that wreaths can be created and themed for any season or occasion. She also explains the history, where wreaths came from, how they've changed, and how she perceives and creates them in her mind. Stephanie's craft focuses on the idea of inviting someone into your home with a piece of you. She also teaches the craft through the platform Hoamsy and encourages her students that they too can make a personalized, unique wreath of their own. This episode was recorded on December 11th in West Roxbury, just outside Boston, Massachusetts. I hope you look up their work and your interest is piqued. I hope you're having a grand day, and please enjoy this week's episode I've titled, You Can Wreath. Hello, and welcome to Pique My Interest. I am currently in West Roxbury, right outside Boston, Massachusetts, sitting in this amazing studio area with an amazing artist for the very first Pique My Interest holiday episode. How are you doing today?
I am great, Scoob. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for being with me. Have you done anything interesting lately?
I guess the most interesting thing is redoing my house. I'm currently in the midst of redoing the flooring in my craft room because currently right now it's just painted cement and I just want to basically put laminate flooring on there. So yeah, I guess that's interesting.
Make it a little more homey.
Yeah.
That. And please pique our interest. Tell us about you. What is your name and where are you from?
So my name is Stephanie, and I'm actually originally from Toronto, Canada, or I guess as a Canadian, you would say Toronto.
And you're currently in Boston?
Currently in Boston, yes. I've been here for a year and a half now.
And what is your craft?
So I would say, obviously wreath making is my big craft and, what we connected over, making, holiday wreaths. Anything really that's hands-on and can give like texture and feel and involving different materials and whatnot.
Yeah. When I was stumbling through the internet, I found Stephanie's wreaths and they were stunning. And I just had to, it's what gave the whole inspiration for the Pique My Interest holiday series, that each episode is going to be centered around a craft, around a certain holiday. And obviously, this holiday season being my favorite, I had to reach out. And you were open enough to reach back out to me and be here with me. So thank you for doing this and sharing your world and sharing your craft. Before we get too much more into it, what makes your wreath making different than other wreaths?
I would have to say that, to be honest, I'm pretty free-flowing. I don't just have like a set, standard look to my wreaths. I kind of ebb and flow with what materials I like to use and, just making it in a sense like eye-catching and making it look, welcoming when it's on your door to be able to just say, hey, that's a nice wreath. That's on someone's house.
Yeah, I definitely say your specialty is creating wreaths for any season. I've seen a lot of your summer wreaths and your autumnal wreaths, and they are just so cool. They evoke a certain feeling, and they obviously tell a story. And I'm so excited to dive more a little bit into that. But what is your background? Do you have an education in art?
So I do not, actually. My background is, I was trained as a pharmacist, so very different than what I'm doing now. But, I've always just had this itch or this need to create, even as a young child.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, let's get into that. What
Yeah.
about your upbringing turned you into a creator? Now, you are a Chinese, Vietnamese, Canadian.
Yes.
With very traditional family. How did that upbringing, with a little bit more of a strict background, kind of give you that itch to pursue creativity?
Well, basically, as you mentioned, being Chinese, Vietnamese, arts wasn't a thing. Like, we weren't allowed to pursue that growing up. It wasn't even seen as like an option as a career, right? But even when I was like a little kid, we were in school, they would ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I legit wrote a fashion designer. So I knew from a young age I wanted to like create, and my mom would even tell me when I was little, I would play with my dolls and just take little scraps of cloth and just sit there for hours making different outfits for them. Like, that was just what I would do. But, going back to being, growing up in an Asian household where we're not allowed to pursue the arts, I then kind of just segued on to pharmacy, and that side of me kind of shut off. And, that I think is what led me to kind of be more creative, because I had that itch where I'm just like, I need to have this outlet to do something, to create something. So I started basically trying different things out with my hands and found that I really enjoyed, making things, whether it be using like yarn or in this case, like, the artificial flowers and different materials and textures, because I just really enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm. And what really piqued your interest about wreaths? Now, I know you do a lot with moss, we'll talk about, and yarn, I'm sure we'll talk about, but wreaths, to me, you're a wreath maker. It's a very specific, very unique craft. What drew you towards wreaths?
So for me, I wanted something to basically, welcome someone to my house. Like, when you look at a door, and I lived in a condo where the doors were all kind of the same, when you look down a hallway, and it's just bland and boring. And I was like, I want something just to kind of brighten up my door and give, that personality of like, that's me. Like, this is my home. This is what you're going to be like stepping into, making it welcoming. And I decided, let me just go to like a craft shop and see if I can purchase a wreath. And when I went there, I personally couldn't find one that like spoke to me. Like, I couldn't like, it didn't have that like zhuzh that I like wanted. So I had in my mind, I'm like, maybe I'll just make one. And I essentially, just started picking up different materials and decided to just, put things together. And it turns out that I was able to make a wreath. And I think for me too, the biggest thing was, like, for example, with these holiday wreaths, it was more so of just like when I created it, it was trying to kind of give guests, or even when you're looking at it, that sense of the holidays where you feel, that feeling of like the first snowfall, or like that coziness, or just the fireplace with like your family, and just bringing the joy, and from the holiday spirit. And so it's just like when I like look, so for example, like when I have one of my wreaths, it's kind of for me like winter, it's like snow, it's, you know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to evoke that kind of emotion from a wreath, as mundane, or maybe some people not think it that way, but that's like what I want to like encapsulate within the wreath.
Yeah, I completely see that. And like I said earlier, you have different seasonal wreaths, which I totally get that story. That now that you've mentioned that feeling of a certain feel.
Yeah.
I love that summer feeling. Maybe it's the sun setting down over the horizon and you get those really bronzy oranges and bright yellows, and I completely see that. So I love that. Another thing that you do is you also teach.
Yes.
I did take one of your classes earlier this week with my wife Lizzie, and we had so much fun.
Oh, that's great.
And just learning from Stephanie and learning all the different things you can do with a wreath. And it's just a very non-traditional craft. You think that you see a wreath and it's got a bow and it's got some ornaments, and our world was blown open by the amount of things that you can do with a wreath. So I just want to say thank you for that and exploring your craft. You are very new to this. How long have you been making wreaths?
Well, wreaths, I actually have been making probably for a couple years now, but teaching wreath making is new for me. So I have done a few classes, but yeah, making the wreaths myself, I've been making for some time now.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you are inviting people in with a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is the history of wreaths, if you know it? Why are those something that invites people? Why were they start being put on doors?
So I actually looked up the history of wreaths, so you're going to get a history lesson in addition to this podcast.
Fantastic.
So basically, I found out that wreaths have a rich history dating back to thousands of years, and their origins are rooted in ancient civilization. And do you know where the word wreath comes from?
No clue.
No clue? Okay, so it comes from the Old English word wreathen, meaning to twist or to weave. Yeah. So in ancient Greece and Rome, wreaths were actually made of laurel, olive, or other leaves that actually symbolized victory and status or achievement. So I don't know if you saw, but in the Olympic Games, people would wear the little crowns. Yeah. It's because they were seen as the leaders.
Champions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, during the Middle Ages, wreaths transitioned from personal adornments over to decorative elements. So they became more associated with religious and seasonal traditions. So the Advent wreath, it actually emerged from the Christian tradition to symbolize hope and preparation during the holiday season. Yeah, and then now in modern times, wreaths have taken on a more decorative and celebratory role and actually used for various purposes. So in this case, welcoming guests or, commemorating events, seasons, and, as you know, they can come in all styles and materials. So
yeah.
Interesting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's very fascinating how that's transitioned over the years.
Yeah.
And like you said, to be able to have something that's inviting you into your house with a little bit of you.
Yeah.
Even with a holiday feel or a seasonal feel to that. I think that's great. And the fact that you're able to teach this craft to others, I'd say that's a form of success.
Yes.
Do you consider yourself successful in wreath making? What is success in wreath making? And what really got you succeeding?
I would say for me, success in wreath making, I think it ties in more with when I'm teaching it. It's not so much of you have a finished product, but it's seeing the transition from the fear and anguish from a student who comes in and they're like, I don't know what to do. I can't make one. And guiding them and showing them that, you can do this. You'll make a beautiful wreath. And then at the end, seeing their faces and how happy they look and just how proud they are with how their wreath turns out. And that is success for me because it's you can take basically nothing and turn it into something beautiful.
Yeah.
So that's how I would describe success in wreath making.
Yeah, absolutely. Just the fact that you're able to do it and being able to teach that a little bit.
Yeah.
And I want to get a little bit into your teaching a little bit. In your creation process. Before we get into the actual wreath making, I want to learn about your headspace. You are a pharmacist.
Yes.
And at one point, you started traveling the country to do some teaching of some kind.
Yes.
And that's what started the flame for teaching. Can you explain a little bit about that process?
Yeah, so essentially that role that I had was to train staff on a new, an upgrade to their pharmacy software. And basically I would go into different pharmacies across Canada and train the staff members within the pharmacy on how to use the program. And it's kind of similar actually when you compare it to wreath making, because at first when it's something new, people haven't seen it, they're nervous, they're uncomfortable, but with a little bit of guidance and having them kind of go through the process, they get a lot more comfortable, they get more familiar, and by the end they're just essentially more confident. And because I'm usually there for 3 days, and then by the end of it they're just oh my god, I can do this, I can use this program, or in this case I can make a beautiful wreath. So that's where the teaching kind of started with that.
Teaching confidence. I love that. I love that. And especially coming into your wreath making class, everybody was kind of I don't know what to do, and it's some garland wrapped around with a bow, and you're coming around, like you said, teaching confidence, just allowing the artist to have the confidence to know that what they're doing is worth the time, or it can change.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah. And one thing too that I really enjoy, especially with the wreath making, is like how I have mine set up is it's like an all you can wreath. So I have all the different all the different, materials, and everyone can just come and pick out what they want. And you were there. It's all the same materials, but at the end everybody had a different unique wreath that was like their style and their personality, and it was like, yeah, it all came from the same stuff. And that's what I loved, was just seeing that variety and seeing how people who thought they weren't creative or I can't do this, they ended up making such a beautiful, unique wreath.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different materials.
Yeah.
There are so many different materials, but at the same time, not a ton of different materials. But everybody did have a different product.
Yeah.
With a completely different vibe.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine as your craft grows and you might get more supplies, the amount of creativity that people can bring to you from your teaching. So I just want to say thank you again for that. And let's get into the actual creation process of a wreath. How do you decide what you're going to make?
Yeah, so essentially I think of a theme. So specifically in this case for the holidays, I would think, okay, first, what color scheme would I want to use, right? And what base frame do I want to use? So let's take, for example, like, the 18-inch metal frame. I want to basically take that, and then usually for me though, when I make my wreaths, I like to have a focal point. So I usually have big floral arrangements around, but I tend to first wrap the frame around with some garland. That's an option. Like, the sky's the limit here. Like, you can really do anything and everything. But I wrap the frame with the garland, and then I start to arrange the floral piece to see, what looks really nice and is eye-catching. And then I start adding some greenery and other, material around to fan it out and frame the piece. And also just making sure that it's more or less symmetrical, depending on, its positioning, like how I want it to look. I like to say maybe kind of like a floral arrangement on a ring.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the process.
Yeah. And you also make wreaths with metal rings. You also have wooden rings.
Yes, the natural branches that are twisted up. Yeah. So it all depends on, I guess, the mood.
Yeah. And you said the word symmetrical, but I've seen a lot of asymmetricality in your pieces too.
Yes. So it all really depends on, quite honestly, on my mood and how I want the piece to look at that time.
Well, what gets your creative juices flowing? What inspires you?
To be honest, I feel like just being outside and just looking at nature, and especially around the holidays, it's seeing, when you're just kind of walking downtown on the streets and you just see, all the holiday lights, and just, when that season starts coming and you kind of get to see all like the florals, for Christmas, and just walking around and even in nature, right? Just seeing all those different things, like I mentioned before, like with the first snowfall, or just things that are in nature that I can take back and build in towards the wreath. That's kind of where I get my ideas from.
Yeah. It's a very interesting time, because November is when things go to die, and then we look at our holiday wreaths and they're full of flowers.
Yes.
Do you know why that is?
Well, I know because the big ones that get sold around December, what are those called again? The poinsettias?
Poinsettias, yeah.
Poinsettias are huge during the Christmas season for some reason. I guess because they're red and they're bright and they're just associated with the holidays. And like just the holly and the little like mistletoe berries and stuff. So
maybe that's why we get a red and green Christmas.
Yeah.
I don't know the history of that. Maybe that's for a future episode. But while you're working, do you like to listen to music? What gets you in the right headspace for creativity?
Funny enough, I actually listen to audiobooks when I'm creating. I don't know, it just it relaxes me, if that makes any sense. Like people who like to listen to murder mystery to relax. I just like to listen to audiobooks as I'm creating.
Yeah. And while you're working, how much do your wreaths adapt and change? Do you stick to your vision, or do you let the wreath speak to you?
That's a great question. I would say I have an idea when I first think of a wreath, but I definitely allow the wreath to speak to me. As I said earlier, I'm very free-flowing. I kind of go along when I have an idea, I place it, and then if it doesn't look right, I can take it out or move things around. So it's all about, exactly what you said, how the wreath speaks to me and how I see it and I always adjust as I go.
Yeah, I realized that while we were making our wreaths, I was like, well, okay, I want this to be the focal point, and I want these coming out over here, and I tie them in there, and then I start putting things over there, and oh wait, that doesn't look good over there. But that was part of my vision. I got to keep it. It's not working. No.
Yeah, and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I love about, with wreath making is that it's not ever set in stone. You can always adjust things and move things around that suit you and what looks good for you, right?
So while you're coming up with your vision and learning what you're going to create, I'm sure you've run into a creative block. How do you overcome a creative block?
For me, I think overcoming a creative block, I tend to basically switch up my craft. So for example, I would dabble in a little bit of crochet, or then I would dabble maybe into like watercolor. Like I kind of switch it up to allow my brain to like think differently, if that makes any sense, to be able to then kind of get me back on track to get that spark to then create.
Yeah. Using other crafts to kind of open up the wreaths, or even just taking a break and stepping back. So that just leads into the next question. What are your hobbies, and do they complement or contradict your craft?
I would say that the hobbies that I do have definitely complement my craft. I have a lot of hobbies. I would call myself the multi-passionate creator. So I love to crochet. I love to knit.
Yeah.
I have done some moss art classes, and I've done, a lot of moss art. As I mentioned, watercolors, using pencil crayons. So I think they definitely help tie into wreath making, because it's all about that creative juices and just using even different materials and textures, and being able to say, hey, like one thing that I thought wouldn't work could potentially, actually suit the wreath, or vice versa, whatever other project I'm working on. So it's kind of like borrowing from the different.
Yeah, when I came to your house, thank you for inviting me over here, I was able to see not only the studio that we're in, where you teach all of your wreath making classes, where it looks like you also do your moss making in here, but you also showed me your house where your craft room is as well. You have a studio and a craft room, and that room is completely different. It's full of yarn and all the different supplies that you do for your painting and whatnot. And thank you for showing me all that work. It just opens me up to see your creativity. So I just would like to tell people that other crafts can help other crafts as well. Art inspires art.
Yes, 100%. I agree with that.
And do you have any other advice? Would you recommend going to school or classes to build on your art? I know you have a little bit of a different background.
Yes. So, being biased because of my different background, I would say you don't necessarily need to go to school for it. By all means, YouTube is your best friend. You can always look stuff up on YouTube. But definitely, for those newbies that are, thinking, oh, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know how to make a wreath. For example, attending a workshop, such as the ones that I host, can definitely help you, because, all the supplies will be there for you. You'll have a guided teacher that can basically show you the ropes and help you go from...
Show you the garland.
Exactly. And go from nothing to something, right? So
now, are you still a practicing pharmacist?
Currently, I am not.
Okay.
I've had to put that on hold because I was licensed in Canada. So in order to work in the States, I would have to get relicensed.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what would be your advice for somebody working in a profession who's also trying to be an artist as well?
I would say my advice is don't get let down by influences from others, or people who might think like, what are you doing? Like, why are you trying to do something else outside of your profession? Just kind of go with your heart and do what you really enjoy, and focus on that, and find what sparks that joy when you do something. Because I think that's what I essentially did, and I loved that.
Yeah, for just pursuing it.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for that. I know it's hard to get any sort of criticism for wreaths, but I'm sure somebody might have looked at it and go, wreaths is a holiday thing. Why do you have a summer wreath? How do you handle criticism?
I think in those cases, I don't really say anything back. It's more so, okay, I listen, but I kind of, in a sense, prove them wrong by displaying what I've created and have people actually comment and say, this is beautiful. Like, how do I get this? How do I make one, right? Because I feel like actions speak louder than words. And just from seeing the wreath making workshop and even my own wreaths that I've made, like, it's just seeing how people react to them. Positively, I mean.
No, I always ask, but I can't imagine you've gotten too much criticism because your wreaths are beautiful. I did just have to ask. I just hope that people will see some of your work and be like, oh, wow, wreath is not just a holiday thing. I can have a summer wreath.
Yeah.
I can have a birthday wreath, or I can have an Easter wreath. Yeah. And I'm very excited to see where your creativity goes from there. But now, I think it's time to clear the air a little bit. Are there any misconceptions about your craft?
I think the one misconception about my craft is that it's not, I don't want to say impossible, but people think it's hard to do. And even seeing from a lot of the people who've attended the workshops, when they first come in, they think, oh my God, this is impossible. Like, I can't make a wreath. I can't do this. But with a little bit of guidance and just encouragement, it can go a long way. And at the end of the class, people end up making wonderful wreaths and being able to do it, I think.
Yeah, like I said, just taking the class, it was kind of walking in and just being like, I don't know how to start. I've never made a wreath. But just a little step-by-step process from Stephanie, and then she implores you to explore your own creativity. Yeah. And the next thing you know, you're building a wreath.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I'm so excited to see where your teaching goes and how much more and where it can lead to. Has anybody ever shown you anything while they've been creating in your studio that you've gone, oh, wow, and that might inspire you to do something?
Well, funny enough, so actually your wife, because you told me about deco mesh, and I was like, what's this? I've never heard of it. So funny enough, I actually went and I found some deco mesh, and I'm probably going to experiment with that now and play around and see if it is an easy material to work with, because that could be perhaps something I'll incorporate for future workshops.
Artists inspiring other artists. That's great. And then just going a little bit further, what's next for the world of wreath making? Do you have any insight to whether or not there's going to be some massive wreaths put on some monument somewhere, or do you think we're going to start to see a new wave of wreath making?
I don't know. I feel like with wreath making, as I said, it comes from like the tradition of welcoming people to their homes and whatnot. So I don't think that will change as much as that, but I think maybe the biggest change or biggest insight is just how they look. You know, maybe we'll go from traditional florals to maybe something more modern and edgy with like, you know, more geometric shapes and stuff. Who knows?
Oh,
so
I love that. Well, and maybe we'll just start to see more wreaths rather than for a month or two during the year.
Yes, I would hope, because I mean, like you said, I have wreaths for every season, and I'm almost tempted to make a wreath for every month. So.
And while we were getting coffee earlier, I just kept asking Stephanie, I was like, do you have a St. Patrick's Day wreath? Do you have a Valentine's wreath? Do you have, because I just want to see more of your work.
Oh.
And like I said, I just can't wait to see where it goes. And speaking of, what is next for you personally? What's next for Stephanie?
What's next for me? Well, I know when you were down in my craft room, I had mentioned that my husband did just buy me a 3D printer. So I'm going to start fiddling around with it in hopes of, knowing how to use this program, because this is all new to me. But we'll see where that goes, because again, like, I love working with like physical pieces and just 3D renditions. So that got me super excited. And maybe I can see a way to like incorporate that into my wreath making.
Yeah, you're definitely sculpting with these wreaths and using a program that kind of 3D prints. I'm sure you're just going to experiment and explore, and that's going to be super fun. But I want to talk a little bit about your moss too.
Yes.
Yes, you make moss pieces.
Yes. Basically, what first started it was renovating the house. My office, I call my office like it's a little cave. It's a little dungeon in the basement. Yeah, of course, my husband gets a nice one with the windows. But I had the office done in our... I should have showed it to you. Basically, it was really dark. It was really like, there's no windows there. And I just said, oh, this is so depressing. Like, if I'm working here, I want like something lively, something greenery, like something with green to like spruce up the space. And I thought, well, why don't I make a moss piece? And that's where that kind of ignited that path. But yeah, so the piece that you saw, Scoop, was the first piece I made for my office, and that hangs there. And then I've just started getting obsessed with making moss again, because it's 3-dimensional. You can feel it, you can see the texture. So I've made other little pieces, and like behind you there's like little ones I have, like I hang in my bathroom. It's just, yeah, like it's kind of all over the place. I'm making also little like moss art for my friends. Like I'm going to be visiting them soon, and I'm going to make a little like framed moss piece. And funny enough, or I guess ironically enough, their last name is Moss, so I thought that was funny.
Yeah, I think it just ties back into that whole idea we were talking about an invitation.
Yeah.
And the feeling, just looking at these, it's a little window into Stephanie's nature, your view on nature. And these little moss pieces are so simple, but they're so lovely and heartwarming, and they just kind of give you this sense of calming. I love it. Scoop. And I'm so excited. Maybe we're going to see some moth wreaths.
Oh,
maybe one
yes, maybe.
It's funny you talked about the textures and the feels of things. I have interviewed several artists who believe that is going to be the next big wave of art. We talked a little bit about artificial intelligence earlier and how that is affecting the art world, but that is usually more digital and maybe onto a canvas of a print of some kind. But what human artists will always be able to do is create texture and have something that you can hold and touch and be able to see this layered piece. And so I think the wreaths are just this big example of showing us this textural art form. 100%. So I just implore you to keep exploring. And then you also teach through Hoamsy, which is a platform of adventures, of activities in the Boston area. And that's how I found you. And you also teach moss making through that too.
Yes, that is correct. I do.
Is there anything else that you think you might want to ask Hoamsy if you could teach?
Oh, yes. I have a lot of ideas, but I do need to test them out first, because they do need to be beginner friendly, and they do have to be within 2 hours. So
yeah, I saw in your house you have a lot of yarn sculptures and a lot of watercolors. And so once again, I'm so excited to see where that goes. Where can we see your work?
So you can actually see my work on my Instagram page. It's at ma_happy place. And my last name is Ma, so it's a play on words with my last name. But yes, that's where you can find it. And
then you can go to the Hoamsy website and research what classes you might be teaching. And I highly recommend, if you're in the Boston area, when this episode comes out, it might be a little too late, but for the next few years, please come take a wreath making class with Stephanie or another Hoamsy teacher. It was so much fun, and you get to take something home and hold up in your house and show people, invite people into your home. I can't thank you enough for joining me and piquing my interest. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, this has been great, Scoop. It's been great meeting you and just hearing your story, too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do end with one question. If you could excel at any other craft other than your own, what would you want to do?
Oh, if I could excel. Like, if the sky's the limit and there's, I would say I would actually want to be a mural painter using, like, spray paint and make these beautiful, massive murals on buildings. Like, I'm blown away every time I see those like murals on walls. Okay, like when I was with my husband, we actually did a bike tour in Ghent, which is in Belgium. If anyone's traveling and they are randomly going to Ghent, I highly recommend doing a bike tour there. But they basically take you around, because Ghent was the first city to allow, I guess they call them graffiti artists, to paint murals on the walls. So we went on a tour that basically took you around all the different murals by all the different artists, and like some of them you're just like blown away, because you're just like, holy, like how did they make this? So I love that.
And you might not even know it, but you have been commissioned to do a mural piece.
I have, yes, but not with graffiti, but like with spray paint and whatnot, but yes.
But with your own craft, please tell us about that.
Oh, yes. So that one was actually for a friend of a friend who owns a hardwood company. They make their own hardwood flooring, but they wanted a 70 square foot moss wall, basically with a TV in front of it. And I spent a week just like planning it out, prepping it, and making this like massive moss piece, incorporating also their wood into it to kind of flow with the moss.
Ooh, moss flow. Well, I'm so excited to see that. Please be on the lookout for Ma Happy Place. And I can't thank you enough for being here, and I can't thank my peakers enough out there. Please let me know if you know of any special or unique art forms or artists you think I should explore. I'm currently in West Roxbury, just outside Boston, Massachusetts, and can't wait to see where Pique My Interest takes me next. Remember, creativity comes from the heart. Push yourselves. Be kind to each other. I'm Scoob Decker, and thank you for helping me pique my interest.
Yay!